CISO exit wounds. What surfaces when the security leader walks?
When your Chief Information Security Officer, or CISO, sends that goodbye email, it rarely feels like just another leadership change. A few minutes later, an organization announcement appears on calendars. Side conversations begin with the Chief Information Officer, legal, finance, and the board, and people start asking what really just happened. They are not only wondering where the CISO is going, they are wondering what walked out the door with them.
Over the next few days, the ripples become harder to ignore. Projects slow down, risk conversations stall, vendors ask sharper questions, customers look for reassurance. The board chair wants a quick update on exposure without the security leader in place. The exit may be described as a career opportunity or a mutual decision, but the organization's reaction often tells a more honest story about how security was actually being run.
This Wednesday headline feature from Bare Metal Cyber magazine, developed by Bare Metal Cyber, looks at those ripples as a kind of organizational stress test. A CISO transition is often treated as a recruiting problem and a communications exercise. Move quickly, say reassuring things, and find the next leader. But in reality, the departure reveals how much risk understanding, decision history, and trust were concentrated in one person instead of built into the system.
That distinction matters. CISO tenure remains volatile, regulatory expectations keep growing, and cyber risk is no longer something organizations can pretend belongs to one executive alone. Leaders who treat a CISO departure as an embarrassment to hide miss the point. Leaders who treat it as a stress test can build a security program that survives turnover instead of being reset by it.
The first thing the exit exposes is how everyday risk decisions were really being made. On paper, the organization may have clear reporting lines and formal governance. In practice, difficult judgment calls may have been routed through the CISO over and over again. Product launches with risk exceptions, architecture decisions, vendor disputes, and control trade-offs all depended on one familiar backstop.
When that backstop disappears, even small decisions feel heavier. Security architects hesitate. Product teams pause. Business leaders are not sure who has authority to accept or reject risk. People realize that "we'll check with the CISO" was not just a normal process. It was a crutch that allowed other leaders to avoid owning risk inside their own areas.
External stakeholders notice the uncertainty quickly. Key customers ask whether the security roadmap is still on track. Strategic vendors watch for signs that response times are slipping or requirements are becoming negotiable. Meanwhile, executives often send two competing messages. They ask for extra cyber updates, but also insist that nothing material has changed. That gap is one of the first real exit wounds. It shows that confidence in security was anchored more in a person than in a shared model of risk.
Inside the security function, the aftermath can be even more revealing. Deputies and senior managers are suddenly pulled into conversations the CISO used to handle alone. They may have to deal with policy exceptions, major customer commitments, uncomfortable post-incident reviews, or trade-offs between investment and exposure. Some step forward because they have been part of those decisions all along. Others hesitate because they are not sure what authority they actually have.
If there is no explicit interim structure, decisions drift towards whoever has the strongest personality or the closest relationship with the CIO, the CFO, or the board. That is dangerous. In just a few weeks, the organization learns whether it has a distributed decision system or a personality-based program with no real backup plan.
Beneath the human and political churn sits a deeper problem: risk debt. Over time, exceptions are granted in side conversations. Legacy systems get indefinite reprieves because they are supposedly on the roadmap for replacement. High-risk vendors stay in place because the business cannot tolerate disruption. While the CISO is present, these choices are held together by context. They remember which deal depended on a yes, which leader promised to revisit a risk, and which mitigation was considered acceptable at the time. When the CISO leaves, that context often disappears. What remains may be a cryptic note in a risk register, a half-complete ticket, or an email thread no one wants to interpret. The narrative that connected the decision to the business reality is gone.
At that point, risk debt becomes an audit and governance problem. Regulators, internal audit, the board, or the next CISO will ask basic questions. Which exceptions are still valid? Who owns them now? What was promised to customers, partners, or regulators? If the reasoning was never captured clearly, leaders are left reconstructing intent from fragments. That reconstruction is slow, political, and often uncomfortable. It may reveal patterns that were easy to ignore while the former CISO acted as a pressure valve. Some business units may have received repeated special treatment. Some vendors may have been handled more gently than others. Some control domains may have been underfunded for years. What once sounded like pragmatic business enablement starts to look like unpaid interest on risk debt.
Mature organizations use that discovery as a chance to reset. They retire stale exceptions, clean up overlapping tools, revisit risk appetite, and bring hidden issues into direct conversation with the board. Less mature organizations focus mainly on hiring a new CISO to absorb the backlog and restore the comforting idea that someone else has cyber risk under control. The better path is to put the risk debt on the real ledger and share ownership of it. Cyber risk cannot sit on one person's personal balance sheet. It has to be visible, documented, and owned by the leaders whose business decisions create it. The next question is just as important. Who owns cyber risk when the CISO seat is empty? The org chart may point to the CIO, the Chief Risk Officer, or an interim leader, but those people often already have full portfolios. Temporary ownership can become a polite fiction. Decisions that once had a clear path now bounce among technology, legal, finance, operations, and communications. That drift is especially dangerous during an incident. Without a clear security leader, the organization can slide into committee behavior. No one feels fully empowered to set the severity level, approve disruptive containment, or communicate clearly with customers and regulators. The CIO may focus on service availability. Legal may focus on liability. Communications may focus on reputation. All of those concerns matter, but without a defined risk owner, the response can become slower and muddier. Board governance can also regress. Cyber updates may get folded into broader technology or enterprise risk briefings. Metrics become simpler. Nuance disappears. Long-standing problems become easier to gloss over. The temptation is to tell directors that things will stabilize once a new CISO arrives. But that only delays the structural conversation the organization should already be having. Stronger organizations behave differently. They assign interim accountability clearly. They document decision rights for key scenarios. They keep cyber risk visible at the board level. They do not let the vacancy become an excuse for strategic drift. The CISO departure also creates a narrative problem inside the workforce. People immediately start interpreting the exit. Some believe the CISO was punished for speaking uncomfortable truths. Others think the leader was pushed out after an incident or worn down by underinvestment. These stories matter more than the official announcement. If people believe candor cost the CISO their job, security professionals learn that raising hard issues may be career-limiting. If they believe the company refused to invest, cynicism deepens among the people already holding the program together. Narrative control is not cosmetic. It is a leadership responsibility. The shockwaves spread beyond the security team.
Engineering, product, and operations leaders may see the departure as a chance to push back on controls they found slow or heavy. Others may worry that resilience and modernization work will lose momentum without a strong advocate at the table. If executives respond with vague or overly cheerful messaging, people notice. When leaders refuse to acknowledge tension, rumor fills the silence.
Good leaders handle this phase with humility and clarity. They do not pretend the exit is routine if everyone knows it is not. They explain which parts of the security strategy remain non-negotiable and which parts are open for review. They give deputies visible support. They bring interim leaders into the rooms where the CISO used to speak. They also avoid rewriting history by turning the former CISO into either a flawless hero or the cause of every unresolved problem.
The deeper design question is whether the security function can fail gracefully when its leader leaves. Graceful failure starts with how decisions are captured. High-impact risk calls should not live only in the CISO's memory. They should be recorded in a living risk register with clear owners, time limits, and revisit dates. Major architecture and control decisions should include context, not just outcomes. What information was available? What options were considered? What constraints shaped the choice?
Structure matters too. A security function built around one hero will eventually fracture. A function built around a small leadership spine can absorb shocks. That usually means at least one deputy with delegated authority and a governance group that includes security, risk, technology, and business representation. These people should not be ceremonial. They should participate in risk exceptions, strategy reviews, and incident decisions before the CISO ever leaves.
Security also has to be wired into the rest of the enterprise. Product, engineering, and operations leaders need written decision rights and a practical understanding of risk appetite. When they know the guardrails, they do not freeze during a transition. They make reasonable calls and escalate the truly complex issues. That is what shared ownership looks like in practice.
Many CISO exit wounds are determined years before the resignation arrives. They begin with how the role is defined. Too many organizations still treat the CISO as a mix of mascot, scapegoat, and universal risk owner. The job description says the CISO owns all cybersecurity risk and enables the business, but it gives little clarity about decision rights, support structures, or realistic measures of success.
That vagueness may feel convenient until there is an incident or a resignation. Then everyone realizes the role was never sustainable. What looked like flexibility becomes a structural trap.
Rethinking the role starts with clarity. Leaders must decide which decisions the CISO truly makes, which ones they advise on, and which risks belong to business lines, technology, or enterprise risk management. Success measures should move beyond no major breach this year. Better measures include documented risk appetite, fewer undocumented exceptions, clearer governance, stronger succession planning, and improved resilience during change.
Reporting lines matter as well. A CISO with access to the board and a peer relationship with other executives is better positioned to distribute ownership. They are less likely to become the lone shock absorber for every unresolved tension in the business. Incentives matter too. If the CISO role is treated as a short-term cleanup mission, the leader may optimize for survival and optics. If the role is structured around durable capability, honest risk documentation, and shared governance, both the CISO and the organization have reason to build foundations that outlast any one person.
At its core, this is about whether security in your organization is a person or a system. A CISO exit is the moment when that truth becomes hard to ignore. If confidence, context, and risk appetite all leave with one individual, the company does not have a mature program. It has a fragile dependency with an executive title.
But if the departure reveals a living record of decisions, shared ownership of risk, and business leaders who can act within clear guardrails, the exit still stings, but it does not destabilize the enterprise.
The practical question is simple. If your CISO left tomorrow, what would surface? Which decisions would suddenly need explanation? Which risks would lack an owner? What stories would your people tell each other about security, leadership, and accountability?
Asking those questions before the next departure is how leaders turn potential exit wounds into a deliberate stress test. The goal is not to make leadership changes painless. The goal is to make sure each change sharpens the security system instead of exposing how fragile it really was.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.